Let's get started with today's story. It all started one Thursday evening over dinner. Laura, my wife of 15 years, was setting the table when she said with a smile, "Ethan's teacher is incredible. Mr. Daniels really understands him. He's the reason Ethan's grades have improved so much." I glanced up from my laptop, trying to appear interested. Laura had been raving about Mr. Daniels for weeks. Our son, Ethan, a bright but easily distracted 11-year-old, had been struggling in math and science for the past year. When Mr. Daniels took over his class, the change was almost instant. Ethan was coming home excited about experiments and assignments. I was grateful, of course, but Laura's enthusiasm was intense. She volunteered for every school activity and signed us up for parent-teacher meetings, even when I felt they weren't necessary. It was as if she had become Mr. Daniels' unofficial cheerleader. "Didn't you just meet with him last week?" I asked as I spooned mashed potatoes onto my plate. "Yes, but this time we're discussing Ethan's long-term progress," she replied, brushing off my question. "You should come." "I've got work," I said, excusing myself. Like always, my job as a financial consultant was demanding, and frankly, I trusted Laura to handle things on the home front. But maybe I shouldn't have. A few months later, things began to feel off. Laura was always busy. If she wasn't at the school, she was running errands, attending events, or heading to yoga. The irony was, she wasn't even a yoga person. It wasn't like her to suddenly be so consumed by outside activities. For most of our marriage, Laura had been a homebody. She loved her routines, cooking dinner, helping Ethan with his homework, and curling up on the couch to watch TV with me. But now, it felt like she was slipping away, piece by piece. One night, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I sat down my book and cleared my throat. "Laura," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "you've been out a lot lately. Is everything okay?" She looked up from her screen, startled, as if I'd caught her doing something she wasn't supposed to. "Of course. Why?" I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant. "I don't know. You've just seemed distant, like you're always busy with something." "Distant," she repeated, laughing nervously. Her laugh felt forced, the kind she used when she was trying to downplay something. "That's ridiculous, James. I'm just trying to support Ethan and yes, maybe take a little time for myself. Is anything wrong with that?" Her words were carefully chosen, almost rehearsed. She sat straighter now, her tone slightly defensive, as if bracing for an argument. "No, of course not," I said quickly, not wanting to escalate things, but something about her answer nagged me. "It's just, you've been different lately," I added, hesitating. "Like tonight. You've been on your phone for hours. You never used to do that." Laura rolled her eyes and placed her phone face down on the coffee table, as if to prove she wasn't hiding anything. "James, you're overthinking this. I'm just busy. Between Ethan's school, helping with his projects, and managing everything else, sometimes I need a break. That's all." Her explanation sounded reasonable, even logical, but her tone carried an edge. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Her deflection stung, but I let it slide. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe I didn't want to admit that my gut was telling me something wasn't right. The real wake-up call came one Saturday afternoon. I'd taken Ethan to the park while Laura said she was meeting a friend for coffee. When we returned, her car wasn't in the driveway. Normally, she would be home by now, especially if she was only out for coffee. But I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she decided to run some extra errands, or perhaps she was hanging out with her friend longer than expected. Then, as we walked up to the front door, Ethan broke the silence. "Mom's with Mr. Daniels, isn't she?" I froze mid-step. The weight of his words sank into the air. The breeze suddenly felt colder, like something had shifted in the world around me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan didn't notice the tension in my voice. He was just a kid, so innocent in his observations. "She said she was going to help him with something at school," he explained, kicking off his sneakers as he stepped into the hallway. "She does that a lot." My heart skipped a beat, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I tried to sound casual, but my words were edged with suspicion. Did she tell you that? Ethan shrugged, unfazed by the change in my tone. Not really. I just know she's always with him. The blood drained from my face, and for the first time in months, I felt the sharp sting of reality. All the little pieces that didn't add up, the late nights, the sudden meetings at the school, the vague excuses, now clicked together like a chilling puzzle. Always? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. She goes to his class a lot or to his office. I think they talk about school stuff, but she never talks about it when she comes home. I could feel my pulse quicken. Each word Ethan spoke stoked the fire that had been smoldering inside me. Does she ever tell you what they talk about? I asked, trying to sound casual, even though every fiber of my being screamed for answers. Ethan paused, looking up at me as though I was asking something strange. Not really. She just tells me she's helping him or that she's working on things for school. But I think he's nice. He gives me candy sometimes when I'm with Mom at school. My mind was racing now, and I had to force myself to stay composed. The idea of Laura spending so much time with Mr. Daniels and Ethan's casual mention of candy from him felt like a slap in the face. I knew I needed to act, but in that moment, I felt like I was suffocating, trapped between my suspicions and the innocent confusion of my son. The image of Laura and Mr. Daniels alone together was burning into my thoughts. The pieces were starting to fit, and none of them were good. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I confronted her. Laura, we need to talk. Can it wait? She said, avoiding my gaze. I'm exhausted. No, I said firmly. Where were you this afternoon? She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve a riddle. With a friend, she said. Like I told you. Ethan said you were with Mr. Daniels. Her face turned ashen. Ethan needs to mind his own business, she muttered, then quickly corrected herself. I mean, he must have misunderstood. Did he? I asked, my voice rising. Laura, what's going on? Nothing, she snapped, her voice trembling. You're being paranoid. But I wasn't. I knew something was wrong. For the next few weeks, I paid closer attention. She was secretive with her phone, her excuses grew flimsier, and she seemed more invested in Mr. Daniels' life than our own marriage. One evening, while she was showering, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her messages. My heart pounded as I scrolled through texts between her and Mark. Daniels, the messages were intimate, not outright explicit, but enough to confirm my worst fears. You looked beautiful today. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? My hands trembled as I read through the messages. It wasn't just casual flirting. It was something deeper, something that left no room for doubt. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed concrete proof, something undeniable. So, the very next day, I hired a private investigator. The investigator was thorough, shadowing Laura when she went to school, documenting every interaction between her and Mr. Daniels. He followed them discreetly, always keeping a safe distance, taking photos of every exchange. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Just casual conversations in the hallway, brief exchanges outside the school during pickup times, nothing alarming yet. My gut told me it was more than what it seemed. Then, one afternoon, the investigator caught something far worse. It was after a parent-teacher meeting, the kind Laura always insisted on attending. The private investigator snapped photos as they walked out of the building together, laughing softly, then paused by a car in the parking lot. I froze when I saw the next picture. Mr. Daniels leaned in and kissed her. It was a quick, passionate kiss, like something out of a movie, but it was real, and it was a betrayal. The investigator didn't stop there. He followed them as they drove off, and sure enough, they pulled into Mr. Daniels' driveway. The photos kept coming, Laura stepping out of her car, looking around cautiously before heading into his house. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. When the investigator finally delivered the pictures to me, my heart sank. There they were, clear as day, Laura and Mr. Daniels caught in lies, their affair exposed for what it truly was. I knew this wasn't something I could ignore any longer. I couldn't let her continue to tear our lives apart, pretending everything was fine. The next day, I knew it was time to confront her with irrefutable proof. Ethan was at a friend's house, so it was just the two of us. I waited for her to come home from one of her endless errands, her face as calm and carefree as ever. "Laura, we need to talk," I began, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. She looked up from her book, feigning innocence, her expression a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "What now?" I didn't waste time. I pulled out the envelope the investigator had given me, my hands trembling as I took out the stack of photos. I placed them on the table in front of her, watching her face as she saw the evidence I had gathered. "What is this?" I asked. Her face turned pale as she stared at the photos for a moment. She said nothing, then sighed. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, almost pleading. "Really?" I snapped. "Because it looks like my wife is having an affair with our son's teacher." "It's complicated," she stammered, looking anywhere but at me. "Complicated?" I repeated, incredulous. "Laura, you're cheating on me with someone who's supposed to be a guiding figure in our son's life." She burst into tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. I was too angry. "James, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." "That's your excuse?" I yelled, the anger boiling over. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Do you even understand what you've done?" She fell silent, tears streaking down her cheeks as she looked at the photos in front of her, finally realizing there was no denying it, no more excuses. The truth was staring her right in the face, and all I could think about was the damage she'd done to me, to Ethan, to our family. That night, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house. I needed space, somewhere I could think clearly, so I checked into a hotel, trying to let the weight of everything sink in. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind was consumed with the images, the texts, the betrayal. I didn't even know what to do with myself anymore. Laura reached out constantly, leaving voicemails and texts, begging me to talk, but her words only made things worse. I was numb, too angry to listen. When I finally returned home to pick up some clothes and more of my things, we crossed paths again. We stood in the living room, the silence between us unbearable. "James, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we just talk?" I didn't answer at first. I just picked up the last of my things, trying to ignore her. But then she spoke again, and this time I turned to face her. "It started out innocent," she said. "We were just talking about Ethan's progress. But then I don't know. He made me feel special, and I don't." I shot back. "It's not that," she said weakly. I got caught up. Caught up. Those two words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. She wasn't just caught up. She was sneaking around behind my back, putting our son's future and our family at risk. The weight of it all crushed me, and without saying another word, I walked out of the house. After confronting Laura, I knew I couldn't let Mr. Daniels off the hook. He wasn't just her affair partner, he was a teacher entrusted with our son's education. I needed to expose him to make sure he faced the consequences of what he'd done. So, I decided to go to the next school board meeting. The tension in the room was palpable as I stepped up to present my evidence. I pulled out the photos and messages, showing the board members the full extent of the inappropriate relationship between Laura and Mr. Daniels. Their faces went from confusion to disbelief as they absorbed the details. "We take these allegations very seriously," the principal said, his expression darkening. "An investigation will be launched immediately." Within days, Mr. Daniels was suspended. The school sent out notifications to parents, and the scandal spread like wildfire. Laura, meanwhile, was devastated by the public exposure, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Shortly after, the divorce proceedings began. I filed for full custody of Ethan, using the affair as leverage. My lawyer was firm, emphasizing how Laura's actions had jeopardized our son's future and well-being. During one particularly heated exchange, Laura broke down. "James, please don't take Ethan away from me." "You should have thought of that before," I said coldly. "You didn't just betray me, Laura. You betrayed him." In the end, the court sided with me. I was granted full custody, while Laura was given limited visitation rights. The months that followed were a blur of rebuilding our lives and adjusting to the new normal. I focused on Ethan, ensuring he felt loved and secure despite the upheaval. He was adjusting, but the sadness in his eyes never fully disappeared. Laura's visits were tense, and I could see how much she struggled with losing him. But I stayed firm. I had to protect Ethan from the consequences of her choices. I felt betrayed, but for Ethan's sake, I tried to keep things civil. It wasn't easy, and the damage couldn't be undone, but I knew I'd made the right decision. Ethan thrived in the stability I was trying to give him, and slowly but surely, he started to smile again. It was a small victory, but it was one I clung to with all my heart. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars would linger for a long time, but I had learned one thing for sure: no matter what life threw my way, I would always fight for my son.